Good morning. The Senate Finance Committee will come to order. Members, we have 2 items on the agenda today. Senate File 241, Senator Kiffmeyer's HABA bill, and Senate File 1093, the Court Orders of Commerce, Senator Newman. First up, Senator Kiffmeyer. Nice to see you. And Senator Kiffmeyer, for Senate File 241, I know you have an amendment to this bill?
Yes, I do, Madam Chair. It is a technical amendment, the A14.
Members, that is not, we're passing that out right now. Can you wait just a moment?
Sure.
Let them have that and you can explain that. And members, I just want to point out there's quite a bit of testimony and paper on this bill in your packet. You might want to take a look at that. Senator Kiffmeyer, to the A14 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the A14 amendment just makes it technically work. It's largely dates or language that just helps to make the process of this work. This language was actually in the supplemental bill last year that we had all voted on, other than the portion of money that is from the general fund that takes care of making sure that we secure the money from the federal government, the HAVA money. So that's the only addition. Otherwise, it is the same language, but the dates were from recommendations from our staff to help make things work in regards to the process.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Senator Kiffmeyer, it's been noted on the last line of the amendment, line 10, the money is going to be released in 2019 instead of 2020.
That's correct.
Okay. Any more further questions to the A14 amendment? Senator Kiffmeyer moves the A14 amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion prevails. To your amended bill, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And so as I initially explained, this is language that was already heard by all committees, passed off the Senate floor, made it to conference committee and into the supplemental bill, and sadly the whole bill was vetoed by the governor. But this bill has already been heard in this language. The addition, again, is the making sure that we have the general fund money to secure that which is required for this year. So that's the only thing that's been added to it. Otherwise, other than the dates to make this work in the process, otherwise that is it. Just to remind us, though, that less than a year ago, Minnesota's election system was stated by Secretary Simon that it is the envy of the nation, and it has rigorous safety measures in place, and that he is confident in the accuracy of our elections. And also, we are ranked number 8 in the most secure election system in the state, in the country. I think that is something very much to be proud of. But we always know we're not resting on our laurels, and we're continuing to ever work forward, because that's what's required in this atmosphere. And so this bill, as stated by the IT person in the Secretary of State's office, that this money for this purpose, which has been well heard and well agreed to bipartisanly, is the most important money that needs to go out to take care of the issues in cybersecurity. And I think that is why I find it very important that we can get this heard today, get it to the floor, and get it moved on.
Thank you. We're going to have some testimony from Secretary of State Simon, please.
Madam Chair, I did give a copy of the amendment. A copy of the amendment was given prior to it being heard here today.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, thanks for having mercy on all of us for postponing the hearing from yesterday. That would have been quite a slog for many of us.
It could have been ugly.
That's quite merciful of you. Thank you, members, for having me here today. I want to be brief because I want to respect your time, and I know this isn't a committee that typically takes a lot of testimony, so thank you for the gesture of respect in allowing me to testify today. We're here on Senate File 241, and I want to thank you for hearing this bill. But this bill is a starting point and not an ending point. What we're seeking today, and primarily, is not money. We're seeking simple authorization, permission slip language to use federal money that is literally right now sitting in an account for us at NMB that we haven't been able to touch for nearly a year. So it's time for us to invest in democracy and do as Congress and as President Trump intended, which is to make all of this money, not some of it, but all of it available to the states. So just zooming out a little bit, members, and it's been alluded to, but I think it's important to get it on the record. In 2016, Minnesota was one of 21 states that was targeted by a foreign government. Hard stop. That's not subject to interpretation or debate. That happened. That's a fact. We were one of the 21 states. Now, we ended up fine. We ended up not having any intrusion or problem or infiltration, and that's great. 2 states were in a very different situation. In Illinois and Arizona, they did get in, and they really made some mischief there, and that's a real problem. It's a national security problem as well. So we passed the test. We kept the intruders out, but we now know that the #1 threat to the integrity of our elections, not just in Minnesota, but nationwide, is the danger of some sort of outside attack, yet again, not just by a foreign government, not just by a particular foreign government, but by outsiders who are seeking to do us harm and undermine our democracy. We know that's the case. So Congress acted, and I have to give credit where it's due. Congress and the President acted last year, and in March of last year, they passed authorization money under the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, and Minnesota's share of that was $6.6 million. So $6.6 million that the President and Congress intended for our use for election security. There was a 5% match component, but, and I have to emphasize this on the record because there's been some confusion, unlike the money that Senator Kiffmeyer got when she was Secretary Kiffmeyer, where you had to get the match first, and you couldn't spend any money until you got the match, the opposite is true this time. We have years to get the match, a couple years to get the match, but you can spend all of the money, 100% before you get a match. Why did Congress do it that way, and why did the President do it that way? Because of the threat to our system, and because it was important to them that all the states have the ability to act and use this money for the 2018 election. It was that important and that vital. So I want to emphasize that. Every single state in the country, except Minnesota, has all of this money now. Let me repeat that. We are the only state in America, the only state, not to have all of its money, not just some, but all of its money. Senator Kiffmeyer explained why that happened last year. At the end of the session, it was made part of the omnibus bill, and that was vetoed. But for whatever reason, Minnesota does not have all of that money. That meant that in 2018, we were the only state not to have that money to make our system as secure as it could possibly be. And I will say this, every day that goes by without legislative approval to use this money that Congress and the President intended for our use that is sitting, parked right now in an account, $6.6 million at MMB, every day that we don't get authorization to use all of that money is a day that it makes it harder for us to secure our system for 2020. That's a fact. Minnesota now has a target on its back. We are the only state not to get this money. If you were a wrongdoer, if you were a foreign government seeking to do us harm, if you were a non-state actor seeking to make mischief or undermine our democracy, where would you go? To one of the 49 states that already has its money and has had it since last year, or would you go to the one state that you know does not yet have all of its money? I know what my answer would be. So we're the only one right now, and that makes us an obvious and tempting target for those who want to undermine our democracy. A word about process. When we left off last session, it's true that our office only asked for authorization to spend $1.5 million of the $6.6 that is rightly ours that Congress and the President intended for us. But the reason we did that was as of then, in March, almost a year ago, the $1.5 million was the portion of money, the chunk of money that we could guarantee that we could make up use of immediately and in time to secure the 2018 election. But a lot has changed since then. We've lost nearly a year. We are behind. Again, we are the only state not to get all of its money. In no other state has it been parceled out or metered out or dribbled out as is happening today. So since last legislative session, I want the committee to know and the record to reflect what we've done. 3 things. Number 1, we started a working group. This was not required or even requested under federal law or state law. No legislator asked us to do this. We did it because it was the right thing to do, the most transparent thing to do. We convened a series of meetings where we had representatives from all 4 caucuses, legislators and staff. We had representatives from the counties, multiple groups representing counties, not just one. The cities, the townships, the IT community. We have Professor Max Halperin here today, who was part of that working group. He's a retired professor of computer science at Gustavus. He was instrumental. We had folks from the disability community and on and on and on. And we met all throughout the summer and fall and even into this last December. We broke into 5 subcommittees at one point, if you can believe that, to really take a deep dive into particular areas of cybersecurity and election security. We came up with recommendations in late December, issued a report about how best to spend this money, kind of a menu or a blueprint for how to spend this money. Again, not required at all by any state or federal law or process or even recommendation. We did that. That report has been on Senator Kiffmeyer's desk and many other legislators' desks since late December. So if anyone had a problem or a question or a concern about our plan to spend the money, if they thought we overshot the mark or we came up short or we did too much of something or too little of something or hadn't consulted the right people, it has been weeks, Madam Chair, weeks. Not one oversight hearing anywhere in the Senate, not one letter, not one text, not one phone call telling us that we were wrong, we got it wrong, or there's something that we didn't look at, something we didn't consider, something we should have considered. Not one. And here we are in mid-February, 6 weeks into session. So we did that working group. Second, we didn't just sulk or mope because we didn't get the money. We didn't just kick our feet and protest. We went out and proactively worked to find partners in the nonprofit and foundation sector who could help us get through the 2018 election. We partnered with a national nonprofit called the Democracy Fund and with a company you probably heard of called Microsoft, and they got us free stuff in time for the 2018 election. It expired after the 2018 election. We no longer have it. But through the 2018 election, we got it for free. It didn't cost the taxpayers one dime, and we managed to mobilize and hustle and work it, and we got some resources in order to get through 2018. Third thing we did is we worked even more closely with the Department of Homeland Security. We had them do 2 weeks of penetration testing, one remotely and one in person, where they literally had a team of 6 or 7 people camped out in our office in late spring and early summer to detect any vulnerabilities and to write a report about how we should correct those vulnerabilities. And I will point out that our roadmap, our blueprint for how to solve this, to spend this money, includes all of the recommendations from the Department of Homeland Security. So these aren't things that we came up with or Professor Halpern came up with. A lot of these are things that federal intelligence officials recommended to us based on in-person and remote testing of our system. So I was heartened to hear at the beginning of the session, and even before the session, that both Speaker Hortman and Majority Leader Gazelka, multiple times in multiple public interviews, named this authorization, all of this authorization, as something that could get done and could get done early in the session. It was bipartisan. It had no opposition that anyone knew of. We had done all the things that have been asked of us and more, and we were heartened by that. Last week, Senator Gazelka clarified his and the Senate's position. He sent a letter to the Speaker of the House clarifying that we, the Office of Secretary of State, would, by the end of this session, get the entire $6.6 million after some legislative scrutiny. We're waiting for the scrutiny. 6 weeks worth of the legislative session. Senator Kiffmeyer hasn't called a single hearing to talk about this, hasn't lifted a finger, seemingly, to tell us where we're wrong, how we should do things differently. Keep in mind, there's already oversight over these funds. There's a federal agency called the Election Assistance Commission that makes us track our time in increments of 15 minutes, that makes us submit periodic reports, and that's justified. You don't just cut a check to someone and say, have fun. You cut a check to someone to and then you make sure that it's being spent for the purpose for which it was intended. So time is being wasted. Our menu of options, as I say, our report as a subject of, as a product of this working group and 5 subcommittees have been out there since late December. Anyone could have asked a question, made a suggestion. There could have been hearings right away. These projects take time. It is not like turning on a light switch. Even the money that is being appropriated or authorized today, the $1.5 million, will take years. We've already lost a year. And I will point out that the money that's being authorized today is for the very vulnerability that Illinois and Arizona had problems with. I mentioned that 2 of the 21 states targeted by a foreign government had a problem. The problem they had is with their statewide voter registration system. There was an infiltration. There was a successful hack. This money goes to that. We can't turn on a light switch. We've lost nearly a year, and every day that goes by that we don't have authorization for this money is a day that we can't make the improvements that we need to that very system. So I was disappointed, of course, when Senator Kiffmeyer decided to proceed with a shrunken version of the authorization to use the funds. She is the chief author of the full meal deal, of the big bill, and was as of January 14th. It wasn't until February 4th that she put in the hopper this bill. Senator Howe was the original author. He was bumped in favor of Senator Kiffmeyer, and so now we have this shrunken bill, which is the second in time bill. So when the first batch of HAVA money came out in 2003, Senator Kiffmeyer was Secretary Kiffmeyer at that time. That first batch was eerily similar to this batch, 6.5 million instead of 6.6 million. It passed, members, with a unanimous vote of the House and a unanimous vote of the Senate. Then the partisan lines were switched. Steve Swigum was Speaker in a Republican-controlled House. The Senate had Democratic control, but it was still divided government, unanimous, no strings attached, no particular oversight, no micromanaging. It was just here. You should have this money. That's what happened in 2003. We're happy to furnish you with the legislative history to show you how that happened. But now, 16 years later, a different standard apparently is being applied. I say apparently because there hasn't been a hearing yet on any supposed oversight or scrutiny. I'm happy to take any suggestions, or more than suggestions, about how the money should be spent. But, you know, we're going on 8 weeks since we produced this report as a result of activities in the interim, and we haven't received word one of guidance about where we went wrong. How did we fall short? And we're waiting for that. Every day that goes by, the clock is ticking. We're less safe and less secure. We have an election coming up in March 2020, a presidential primary, statewide election. These projects take time. Again, there is no need for funds, for matching funds right now, but we do need all of the authorization. I'd refer members to the joint letter from all three of our local government partners in your packets, the counties, the cities, and the townships, joining together in one letter saying they support full authorization of all of this money. And Professor Halprin also has an excellent letter in there explaining the process and why it's important that all of this money be authorized. I will just say one thing, and I don't mean to be all cloak and dagger here, but it's important to get it on the record. So one of the great ways that the federal government has been helpful to us is they have given security clearances to all secretaries of state +2. So it's secretaries +2 in every office. So I and 2 in my office, one of whom is here today, have a secret level security clearance. And that has enabled us to get intelligence briefings and threat assessments from FBI counterintelligence, from the Department of Homeland Security, from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And 3 weeks ago, I had such a briefing in Washington. And there's a lot I can't say, but here's what I can say. The threat is real. It is accelerated from where it was in 2016. And I can tell you what the Department of Homeland Security has said publicly and not get in trouble. What they have said publicly is that we in the elections world should expect more of these attacks from more sources. Not just the one foreign government, but other foreign governments, other non-governmental actors, and perhaps even some domestic sources as well. At a time like that, in a situation like this, it is imperative that we get the authorization for all of this money as soon as we can. So, you know, this isn't so much about me or my office. This is about the voters of Minnesota and about the security of our election system. So the House today, on the floor of the House will pass a bill that gives us full authorization. I predict that the vote will probably be overwhelming and bipartisan. But for reasons that I'm not sure about yet, frankly, the Senate is the holdup. So we like to be #1 in Minnesota in a lot of things, but right now we're #1 on a bad list. We're #1 in the sense that we're the only state in the country that is facing continued delay in getting us authorization to use this federal money. We're #1 in that bad category. The only state in America not to have the freedom and flexibility to act immediately to bolster and secure our election system. So if the legislature doesn't grant the full authorization, then the legislature will be putting in jeopardy the security and integrity of every Minnesotan's vote. It is time to invest in our democracy. This bill is a good first step, but Madam Chair, I really hope it's not the last step. Thank you for your time and attention. And I do realize this is not a committee that you typically take a lot of testimony in, so I appreciate the gesture of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Senator Champion.
Madam Chair, if I could respond.
I think we'll go to Senator Champion first, Senator Kiffmeyer, and then we'll get to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Secretary State Simon, I was going to ask you about why you only sought last year a partial authorization, and now I've heard you talk extensively about the full authorization that is needed, and so I understand your rationale and your thinking. And I also understand that you convened this working group, and I would like to say, you know, thank you for that. And so my question is directly related to whether that working group also had some input as to whether, as to how the funds, the full authorization, if you're given the full authorization, whether they had some feedback as to how those funds should be spent.
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Champion. Yes, the whole idea of this working group was to put how we spend the money into the hands of all of our stakeholders. We couldn't put on elections in the state without our partners, particularly at the county, city, and township level. They are our co-equals when it comes to putting on elections. They count the votes, not us. They hire the election judges, not us. They buy the elections equipment, not us. So we oversee that process, but they do the hard-line, front-line election work. And so it was imperative to us that we have them at the table in a meaningful way, and the subcommittee work was intended to make sure that it wasn't just done in broad brushstrokes at a committee level, but that those who were interested could dive down into real detail in those 5 different subcommittees and come up with the best ways to spend this money. Incidentally, I should have said this, Senator Champion, into the record. We have 5 years from the date of enactment to spend the money, so roughly the spring of 2023. We have 2 years from the date of enactment, roughly to the spring of 2020, to secure the 5% match. So we have some time, and we can start spending this money immediately. So yes, the stakeholders were key, and they all signed off on the end product as well, as reflected in the letter in your packets.
Senator Champion.
One last follow-up. Senator Secretary of State Simon, do you see the process of requiring your office to come to the legislature to authorize release of those funds as a problem? And if so, can you sort of articulate why that should be changed so that future appropriations don't get held up in our political system?
Sure. Thank you.
Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair and Senator Champion, another thing I should have said on the record, there are only 5 states in the country, Minnesota is one of them, that has this extra step. In 45 other states, their money was a direct pipeline from the federal government through the Election Assistance Committee right to their Secretary of State's office. Not so in Minnesota. There's an extra step where we need to seek legislative approval or authorization, or as I said, permission slip language to use the federal money. Again, to emphasize, this isn't state money, doesn't impact anyone's budget target, anything like that. So it is cumbersome, it is an extra step, and as we saw at the end of last legislative session, when there are political disagreements having nothing to do with this bill or our office, the consequence is that this money can get held up. I'm not interested in relitigating what happened at the end of last session. I'm sure there's plenty of fingers to point on all sides, but the risk was exemplified by what happened at the end of last session, which is it gets caught up in other fights having nothing to do with this money, and then you don't get the money for a whole election. That's the problem with having that extra step.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, would you like to respond, or would you? We have 2 more people that have questions.
If you want to do questions, I can wait.
Okay. Senator Benson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to be clear. These are just the funds that were vetoed, that were legislatively agreed to, and then the other funds that Secretary Simon would bring in were not agreed to and hadn't gone through the process. So I just want to clarify for my own purposes on the Finance Committee, these were the vetoed funds that would have been accessible were it not for a veto. And generally, we're trying to move the things that had been vetoed, move them early. I have several bills that have gone through my committee that were just about the vetoed funds with no other policy added to them. And for example, the Board of Medical Practice, we've moved many of their things that were vetoed. We didn't attach their other requests to it. We tried to stay really focused on the things that had been agreed to and move them forward. So as long as we're clear, these were the vetoed funds, and the rest we'll vet in proper order. Secretary Simon talked about cybersecurity and the increasing risk. I had the privilege of sitting down with our former CISO and actually seeing the place, in the military they call it a SCIF, but the place where they review. And I got to see a pre-4th of July Homeland Security update. It's increasing everywhere. Cybersecurity has to be a priority for everybody, and the previous administration did not listen to the CISO and increase our overall cybersecurity profile. So I commend Senator Kiffmeyer for moving this cyber language early in session, not waiting, so that we can improve at least our election system. Secretary Simon mentioned working groups. The OLA had a report come out in 2018. Does Secretary Simon fully support, and has he implemented the recommendations from March of 2018? Because I see them referred to here. So if we're going to take advice from working groups, I'd like to make sure that the OLA has a position. If you could comment, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Benson. Secretary Simon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Benson. Yes, we have implemented all the things asked of us in the report. And I would add, I appreciate this from Senator Kiffmeyer's amendment. The amendment today, she was correct, was a technical change to the bill. The report that is in the amendment or in the bill as amended is something that we already do. So whether this amendment was in there or not, we're already doing it as requested by the OLA. The one thing that is new is the obligation on the counties. I'm not sure yet we have a position from them because this is a new obligation on them. But in terms of our office, yes, that is one example of a report, many things that the OLA report requested that we do and that we've already done.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things. First of all, let me offer an apology to Secretary Simon for a misstatement I made to him. The Secretary called me a couple months ago about this or so, and we discussed this, and I told him that I thought, given the history of the Senate, this committee, there would not be a problem in securing the authorization for the appropriation of the full amount, and so I misstated that and apologize, because obviously that's not what we're all about. Let me also, Madam Chair, folks know I like history. Let me just review a little bit of history. It's my academic background, so I often lapse into it. Secretary Simon made a reference to 2003. I chaired this committee that year. This was my first year as chairman. My counterpart was former Representative Knobloch, and we discussed the request for the HAVA funds as presented by Secretary Kiffmeyer, then Secretary Kiffmeyer. And our discussion was this is something that needed to be done. We were not going to let it lapse into an end of the session, whatever chess game we like to play around here. Members might recall that in 2003, that was in the aftermath of an exceedingly close presidential election in 2002. And the conversation that the two of us had, again, Representative Knobloch and myself, was that in the winter of 2003, a very comparable time in the legislative session, we couldn't afford to wait until the next election, which was 2004, without implementing the requested amount on a very expeditious way and fashion. And obviously at that time, we weren't looking forward to a presidential primary coming up approximately a year from that date. So, Madam Chair and members, the history is such that when we have had a threat to the election system, and there's no question, I don't think anybody at this table, I hope nobody at this table, would disagree that the threat to the election system today is far more pronounced than it was in 2003. We acted in an expeditious way, and I'm disappointed that this is not the case today. I can only suggest or infer that, again, maybe it's one of the end of the session chess games we like to play or something. So obviously we'll have an amendment to try to correct this, and I hope members will have listened carefully to Secretary Simon, excuse me, who speaks. I've known Secretary Simon for a number of years, and he's not one to hyperbole, and hasn't done so today, but speaks in very measured terms, and I think we should pay attention to what's happening far beyond the walls of this building or the walls of the Capitol, and arguably the shores of the United States of America. That's hyperbole on my part, but a very true hyperbole.
Thank you, Senator Cohen. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Simon, I am reassured to hear your commitment and awareness and dedication to making sure that our elections are safe and secure. Our very government, our very form of government requires that every one of our citizens has confidence that we have integrity in our elections. So I understand also your frustration as I heard your testimony that this money, this HAVA money that could help us better secure our election system was held up last year. And we're all concerned about that. And it wasn't Senator Kiffmeyer that held that up. It was part of the vetoes at the end of the session that caused that money not to get to your office where we could start implementing that. So I understand that concern and fully support the Senate File 241, getting the needed money, authorizing the match so we can get the needed funds to better secure our elections. Now, I just wanted some further clarity. I might have missed part of your testimony, but I thought you were, just to refresh my memory here, I thought you were talking about, you were concerned that there was some higher level of accountability or transparency here than in the past. And I would like you to, what I'm particularly interested in is, do you support the first part of the bill, which are those reports? And I believe those are the ones that were really targeted, that the OLA report really targeted, that showed that there was a need here for more accountability and transparency. So what exactly were you objecting to regarding transparency and accountability regarding our election system?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Nelson, yes, to be clear, and thank you for the question. Yes, we support the language that is in Senator Kiffmeyer's bill, the policy language there. These are reports we're already doing, so whether it was in statute or not, we're doing them. We're happy to continue to do them. There's no harm in putting them in statute. We're doing it. It was a recommendation of the OLA report. What I'd mentioned in passing, and maybe I didn't choose my words carefully, is if any senator is concerned about oversight about the spending of this money, because it's federal money, there's a federal agency called the Election Assistance Commission that is providing intense oversight over this money, as you'd expect, because Congress shouldn't just be, nor should any legislative body, just be cutting checks and kind of hoping on a wing and a prayer that it's spent in the right way. They are requiring of us periodic reports. They do auditing of how we spend the money, and they, in fact, will be requiring us, once we get the money, to report our time in 15-minute increments, so we can say how much time has been spent. That was the point I was making, which is there isn't the need for a two-track approach to oversight over how the money is spent. The federal government has taken ownership of that process because it's federal money. That's simply the point I was making. I'm not objecting to it either. I welcome it, and it's totally the right thing to do. Congress should be figuring out how money is spent so that it's spent in the way that it was intended. And we're happy to submit to that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Westrom. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Simon, you referenced the two states that had a cyber attack, assumedly. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what happened in Illinois and Arizona, and what were they trying to do? What was the net effect of the attack?
For sure.
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Westrom. So, as I mentioned, there were 21 states that were targeted. In only two, we were among them. In only two of the states, Illinois and Arizona, was there what you would call a breach, sort of a successful hack. It was worse in Illinois than in Arizona, so maybe I should take that more extreme case. And 60 Minutes, the news program on Sundays, did a segment on this last spring, I want to say maybe March or April of 2018. And maybe it's available online somewhere, but they described what happened in Illinois, which is they got into the Illinois equivalent of what we call SVRS, the statewide voter registration system. I think it goes by a different name or acronym there, but it's the same thing. They got in there, and they were rooting around in people's private information. Keep in mind, that database contains sensitive personal information. It contains Social Security information, driver's license information, residential history, voting history, military history sometimes if applicable, and on and on. A lot of sensitive stuff. So they were rooting around and had access to that information. They also had the capability to delete people from the voting rolls, which in a state like Illinois and many states in this country is particularly consequential where they don't have same-day voter registration. I will say one mitigating factor we have in Minnesota is if someone got in and zeroed out a bunch of people's voter registrations. One saving grace we have is that if that happened to me and they said, Mr. Simon, you're not on the list, and I said, what are you talking about? I've been voting here at this church for years and years and years. What do you mean I'm not on the list? Well, we have no record of you. I could just say, fine, give me the piece of paper. I'll register right here. We have that luxury in Minnesota. In other states where they don't have that, I don't know what they do. some combination of things, I'm sure, but it's a much more difficult situation. So that's the sum and substance of it. 60 Minutes did a really good job, though, talking about what that meant for Illinois, what information was exposed, and what harm could have been done that wasn't necessarily done but could have been done in Illinois. That's the best I can give you on short notice, but I hope that
Senator
answers your
Westrom.
question, Senator.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. And so Arizona was something similar. Have you been in contact with those states to figure out what they've done? It doesn't maybe sound like it, but what are they recommending that they're doing if you've been in contact with them?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom. Yes, we've been in close contact with those states, as have other Secretary of State's offices, and they've been very forthcoming about it. Arizona in particular, about, look, here's what happened, here's what we could have done better. I'm hesitant in this forum to give a roadmap to the bad guys. I hope you can understand, but Department of Homeland Security has recommended to us certain measures, which we have already taken and will continue to take, particularly with this money, that will help ensure that we don't have an Arizona-like or Illinois-like situation. That's as much as I'm comfortable saying. Maybe we could have an offline discussion, but there are measures that we have taken and will take that we think can keep the bad folks out.
Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair and Secretary Simon, so it sounds like some of the attacks that at least we know or concerns is it really could impact the integrity of the voting rolls, as Illinois and Arizona have experienced. That's one of the things we'd be wanting to enhance and protect here in Minnesota too, then, is part of what this money would go for.
Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair and Senator Westrom, yes, that's correct. And that's really job number one, is protecting that SVRS system and making sure it's as well-functioning as it can possibly be. That really is the spine of the system. The name implies a smaller version than it is. It's more than just a statewide voter registration system, SVRS. It does so much more and has been asked to do so much more since it was built. And I should add, because she deserves credit, it was built very well and very capably by then Secretary Kiffmeyer in 2004, very expertly, very well done. And so our use of the money to upgrade it is not at all a reflection on the excellent product that it was and is. It's just that, like so many other things that were built in 2004 and built extremely well in 2004, it needs modernization and upgrading, but it's no reflection on the excellent job done by the Secretary of State's office back then. But that is job number one, is that SVRS system.
Last question, Madam Chair.
Senator Westrom.
So, Secretary Simon, as this money would flow out to potentially other money down the road, is there a threat? And it seems like there could be, or maybe some threats we don't know about, but I mean, ultimately, the ballot box and making sure we have accurate elections, is there, does the cyber concerns go as far as precincts and local precincts where voting takes place? And is there examples of scenarios where maybe there's mischief played even at the local level through information they're getting, or any way they could impact the actual count in the election votes that are cast on election day?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom. Excellent question. I would put it this way. I am less concerned. I wouldn't say unconcerned. That's not the case. I am less concerned about mischief at the ballot box, at the polling station, than I am about the potential vulnerability to SVRS and the statewide data systems. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not unconcerned. I am concerned, just not as concerned. And one of the reasons I'm less concerned, though concerned, is that we're a paper ballot state, which is great. We made the smart choice. You know, it's one of the ironies, isn't it, that this is an example where low tech beats high tech. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes high tech isn't always better. We are a good old-fashioned paper ballot state, and I think we have a rock-solid bipartisan consensus in the House and Senate here in Minnesota, at least. I can't see us changing that for the foreseeable future. We've got paper ballots, hard-to-hack paper, and you have something that you can hold on to, that you can look and touch and feel, and we, under federal law, must keep those ballots for almost 2 years after the election. So if anyone has a question or problem or hunch or bad vibe or whatever, we can take a look at that stuff. Now, there are other potential vulnerabilities in the polling place, but because we're paper-based, they are almost always going to be found out. If someone, for example, tried to get in and change a ballot total, or add a 0 to someone's vote total, or subtract a 0 for that matter from a vote total, they're going to get caught, almost certainly. So I'm not unconcerned, but I'm less concerned than I am by what I see as the bigger threat, which is the threat of someone getting into the spine of the system, the SVRS system. That's the fairest answer I can give. Again, there's not a 0% chance. I wish I could say there's a 0% chance of mischief at the polling place with vote totals. It's more than 0. There is a concern, but the bigger concern is the one that I mentioned, in my opinion.
Okay, Senator Westrom, good. Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, your final comments and response, but before we get to you, I would like to defer to Mr. Naumann. And members, I want to just take you back to the original bill and the amendment that we have done to the appropriation, Section 3, page 2, line 7. I just want to make sure that you understand we scratched 2020, and it's appropriated back to 2019 here. And also on paragraph B, is the 2019, scratch 2020, 2019. And this is something, if we do get enacted today, it will be on our February forecast. So, Mr. Naumann.
So, Madam Chair and members, with respect to Section 3 in the bill, I'm looking at lines 2.5 through 2.21. This is the finance jurisdiction of the bills in front of us. So Section A, or paragraph A rather, appropriates 1.534 from the HABA account that's established in Chapter 5.3. I think this is mostly federal funds, as has been testified to. For this committee's information, paragraph B rather, appropriates $163,000 it actually transfers that money from the general fund to the HABA account. I believe this is for state match. But this is beginning this would be scored as a liability against the general fund. We'd begin tracking money, and this is the first occasion, so it's worth noting that we would begin spending money. And as the chair pointed out, the Department of Finance has notified us, or M&B rather, has notified us anything that's enacted by roughly the 21st or 22nd of this month, so today, if it were actually enacted today, it would be scored against the February forecast or included in the February forecast. That seems unlikely, so this will probably be a cost against after the post-February forecast, so we would carry it at end of session tracking. That's really the implication here. If enacted, it would get subsumed into the forecast. Given that that's unlikely, it'll be something we track at the end of session.
Questions to that? Senator Kiffmeyer, your final comments and response, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it very much. I want to mention in regards to the paper ballots, Minnesota stood strong for paper ballots from the beginning, but I want to tell you that was not easy. Huge amount of pressure to go all electronic. The state of Georgia went all electronic with their HAVA money. They had to throw it all away. And what did they go to? What Minnesota has. Other states, matter of fact, I visited last year Los Angeles County, which has 5 million plus voters. They're doing paper ballots. They're also doing gaps between registration, marking a ballot, and counting ballots, which, by the way, we have in Minnesota and have for years. So yes, Minnesota is, but I want to tell you, the pressures to move fast, to move quick, to just do this, to do that, to change what we have is very, very real and very strong. But I have held equally strong because I knew that the technology, much as I loved it, technology is wonderful, but there are certain places where it just is not. And when you cast a private ballot separating who cast it from what you voted for, that is not like a credit card receipt where you can go back and check it out. It has to happen right the first time. And Minnesota voters like it. Other states are moving to the Minnesota model. I held firm. But there were pressures, a lot of pressures, from counties, from other folks to do differently, and held firm for that. Just to mention that last year, not last year, but the previous year, there was an incident where we had an upload issue and vote totals were reversed. So it was only due to some sharp folks taking a look locally and saying, wait a minute, I don't think that's right, and asked to check. And so there was an upload reversal of that data. And so the supposed winners actually ended up being the losers, and this was reported as well in the newspaper, but I probably pay more attention to this stuff than most do. But it is, there are a variety of areas that, yes, that we're vulnerable. To mention that in other states, when you mention what if they're not on that list or there was something, they have provisional ballots. So they're able to have a process by which they cast a provisional ballot, and afterwards they can check that out. And by the way, provisional ballots is an allowable expense as determined by the Election Assistance Commission to be included in this particular funding of money. I do regret that way back in some of those years past, it was difficult. After the Bush v. Gore election, it was an intense pressure in regards to that. And I appreciate hearing, Senator Cohen, your background and meeting and doing all of that. However, it was a legislative choice to do it this way, and I went with that and complied with that. Matter of fact, there are 2 other secretaries of state after the audits who ran into trouble. One of them, I believe, was either indicted or was being talked about as far as being indicted, and others had other issues. So it is judicious to be careful. I find that, I always said that oversight will, in the end, stand us well. And so when Minnesota was audited, there were no issues. And I think that's important to remember. It's okay to do that. And we do want to have safe and secure elections. We all agree to that. And certainly I appreciate Secretary Simon and our work and our commitment and our effort. But the most important thing, as you've heard today, is the state voter registration system. That is the most important. The speediest way to get there is to take that portion, which is already heard and been supported bipartisanly. Let's get this done. Let's get 241 out the door. In regards to being targeted on cybersecurity, that is legendary. You are always targeted. Outside targets are one thing. Phishing is another way of going outside, inside by your own staff if they're not careful enough. There are a variety of things you have to have in place to protect yourself. This outside threat is one that we know about. And again, the state voter registration system money that is here today is the most important money that helps get us to accomplish that goal. The match, why wait? We can do the match today. We can take care of that. And I think that those are the issues that I think are most important. And just to go back a little bit, as Senator Gazelka said in the beginning, that the context of the HAVA money and that conversation then was in the context of what was in the supplemental bill. He has clarified that, but also clarified that our support and our commitment for the entire money, and if we can do it earlier, so much the better. But in the meantime, we'll apply the same careful approach has been done in the past, and it has stood Minnesota well in the test of time, and I'm committed to doing that today in the best interests of Minnesota voters. Thank you, members, and I ask for your support and vote for Senate File 241.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Cohen.
Madam Chair, I've got the A13 amendment.
Senator Cohen moves the A13 amendment. We do not have that. Senator Kiffmeyer, do you have that amendment yet?
I do not.
Okay. Senator Cohen to the amendment, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would move the amendment. I'm not going to offer any other discussion other than indicating this appropriates the full amount. It doesn't change anything else that Senator Kiffmeyer has in her bill, other than allowing the Secretary of State to utilize the appropriation for the full HAVA amount. I would just suggest that Secretary Simon has made a very compelling, cogent, and articulate case as to why he needs the money now. I'll just make the comment that Senator Kiffmeyer made a reference to ongoing problems with technology and the fact that this is not something new, something that continues. What is new is what we saw relative to the 2016 election, which has been proven in demonstrable fashions numerous times that this was an unusual attack, a unique attack on the American electoral system. And again, Secretary Simon has made a very compelling case. So I would move the amendment. Again, it doesn't in any way change anything else that Senator Kiffmeyer presents to us. I would ask for a roll call, and something that I don't think I've ever done, would ask that the roll call be printed in the Senate Journal.
Senator Cohen moves the A13 amendment. A roll call has been requested. A roll call will be granted. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Madam Chair and members, this is an immediate appropriation that would bypass the oversight of the legislature. I do not support bypassing that. I think it has stood us well, stood the test of time in the past, and I don't think that doing it at this time would also be in the best interest, and so I do not support the A13 amendment.
Senator Limmer.
Madam Chair, just for a point of order, when there's a request to have the record printed in the Journal, it requires 3 hands in a committee. And I didn't hear the request for 3 hands.
And Madam Chair,
Senator Cohen.
Mr. Bodner just informed me the same thing. As I mentioned, I've never asked that for that before. So Senator Limmer is correct and would ask the chair to see if there are 3 hands requesting the printing in the Journal.
Thank you, Senator Cohen, Senator Limmer, for that, and we do have that out. It was on the committee meetings on page 11, 12.10. So do we have 3 hands for a roll call, a request for a roll call to be printed in the Journal? Yes, there is. Okay.
And Madam Chair.
Roll call granted.
And Madam Chair, as a
Senator
result, I wanted to thank Senator Cohen for asking for the roll call, because I would have done the very same thing.
Okay. Senator Westrom, to this amendment, please.
Madam Chair, I just sent Council Bodner a request by email, but not knowing this amendment came up, I would like to ask a few questions, but also look at some language that maybe we could improve this amendment with. Secretary Simon's, actually Senator Kiffmeyer, you made a comment in your statement that provisional ballots are in other states but not in Minnesota. That is a security method that's allowed. Can you expand on that, or did I hear you correctly that the money we're allocating today could be used towards provisional ballots or part of the 6.6 that Secretary Simon and you are talking about with the HAVA money could also be part of the security we use to enhance our the integrity of our system?
Secretary Simon or Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom members. Yes, that is correct, that the EAC has reported to us at our query in regards to that, and they said yes, that provisional ballots is acceptable expense to be using this money for, and also that 47 other states do have provisional ballots. Minnesota is one of 3 that do not.
One of 3?
Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, you said we're only one of 3?
We're one
Senator
of 3.
Kiffmeyer.
Madam Chair, yes,
So,
one of 3.
Madam Chair,
Senator
Secretary
Westrom.
Simon, if I could ask a question.
Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, Secretary Simon, has Minnesota taken steps to secure the integrity of voters in elections with provisional ballots, or why not if we're one of only 3 that do not use that? We've heard both you and Senator Kiffmeyer talk about the different threats here today, one of them being the potential that somebody could manipulate the system. That could probably go either way. Somebody's name could be deleted or somebody's name could be added. Close to the election, that would get to be pretty tough once those ballots are in the ballot box. My understanding of provisional ballot would be if there's a question of anybody's eligibility, that goes in a separate box. But could you explain what we have here in Minnesota that does what provisional ballots do, or why we're only one of 3 that do not have provisional ballots?
Senator Westrom, we are on the A13 amendment too, so.
Well, Madam Chair, just to help tie you into this, I think Senator Cohen's amendment would be ripe and probably a good place that we add provisional ballots for being required out of this money that's going to be allocated. And so that's the amendment I plan to bring forward.
I
just so
see.
you,
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom. Well, we've had entire hearings on the pros and cons of provisional ballots. Minnesota was grandfathered in by the National Voter Registration Act in the early 1990s. We weren't required to have provisional ballots because we were one of the states that had same-day voter registration. So as I tried to explain in my earlier testimony, that is our way by which someone who is somehow off the list, erroneously kicked off the list, or through human error is not on the list, the method that we have chosen for decades in Minnesota is that and not provisional ballots. There's a lot more I could say about provisional ballots, except to say this, and maybe the bottom line for this committee is provisional ballots is something that will end up in a political thicket that we'll never get ourselves out of. There just is not bipartisan agreement on that. I don't think there will be anytime soon. So adding that to this or any other bill will doom the bill, just as a matter of the practicality of it.
Senator Westrom.
So, Madam Chair, Secretary Simon, so 47 out of 50 states have it, and somehow we would know better in our state when 47 states go to that. I don't understand your logic, because to the answer you just gave me a little while ago, one of the concerns would be that somebody could get in and manipulate the database. It would be foreseeable to me that somebody could get in and manipulate that same database to say somebody's eligible to vote when either they maybe aren't a resident properly of Minnesota, or maybe they have a felony on their record and they're not supposed to, but that wouldn't mean they wouldn't have IDs that could, or something else, a lease or a utility bill or something here in Minnesota that could allow them to go in and, if they wanted to participate in chicanery and try to vote, why that wouldn't be part of our integrity system. It sounds to me like that's not a concern to you, and so I don't know what the controversy would be if 47 other states do that, and you're saying that somehow is a thicket here that we don't want to look into.
Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair and Senator Westrom, what I would say is this: there just isn't the support for it. There just isn't. And I could tell you about my reasons for opposing provisional ballots. I don't want to take up more of the committee's time. They are many, but I don't think that would be very constructive. I'm happy to talk to you about that offline. I'm just telling you there isn't the support for that. There's a reason why Minnesota has relied for 4+ decades on same-day voter registration as our fail-safe. It stood us well. We've been a leader. We're #1 routinely in voter participation and in integrity. That's quite a play to pull off, where it's easy to vote but very hard to cheat in Minnesota, and we've accomplished that in a bipartisan way over many decades. And so our current structure of law, I think, has accomplished that. And I think introducing this new element, which is very controversial, would slow down rather than speed up this bill, I can tell you, and would have all sorts of other complications. So rather than bog down the committee and its time with the pros and cons of, or the cons, I should say, of provisional ballots, I would just leave it at that. It's a non-starter in many circles.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are other reasons that I can enter into, but probably the greatest focus is that the A13 amendment is dealing with the Finance Committee. That's a discussion better for us to have in the State Government Policy, Finance, and Elections Committee, and so I would hope for that. But more importantly, that the fastest way for us, and I've worked hard on other kinds of amendments as well, to keep the 241 focused on what was previously in the supplemental budget bill that did have strong bipartisan support, and to get this money out the door as quickly as possible to the governor's signature, and to get this into the hands of the Secretary of State to do the most important work that needs to be done right now. So that is my focus on the bill, keeping other kinds of amendments so that this money can be focused to do just that.
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Nelson, and we do have another very important bill that we need to get through today.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, Senator Hayden first. I'm sorry, Senator Hayden. I didn't follow my list. And then Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. In light of all the discussion, and we have more, I guess, and maybe this is the wrong place at some point, I'd love to kind of figure out what the plan is for the rest of the money. I know we're on the amendment. I presume it's not going to pass, but I still, or maybe I should ask a question. Senator Kiffmeyer, Madam Chair, what is the plan for the rest of the funds if, for some reason, Senator Cohen's amendment doesn't go through? What is the process in which to go through? Secretary Simon said that they had all of this work that they've done. They haven't had a hearing yet. So can you help us understand what your thought plan is a little bit this session to appropriate the rest of the money that would be left after this bill gets done?
Thank you, Senator Hayden. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Hayden, members, for that question. My focus is to get this bill done and then get that out the door, get it tucked away so that can be accomplished. That is the most important thing. That is my focus. Get that done as expeditiously as we possibly can. And then secondly, after that, to hold the hearings and make sure that we give it the same Minnesota attention, hearing all those good things and putting it through its paces, which I know will be very interesting. But the big thing is to not get deterred and to be focused on getting this most important money out the door and in the hands of the Secretary of State office. But our commitment is to follow up with the rest of the money.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Kiffmeyer, that's an important thing for me to hear because certainly I fully support making sure that we capture all of those much-needed HAVA funds from the federal government. But I have to say that I am concerned that about this amendment. And my concern is that it looks like it's bypassing the very elections committee. It appears to me that this amendment is in an effort to bypass state government and elections committee. And so my hope would be, Senator Kiffmeyer no longer sit on that committee, but that we would take this up, your committee would take up the full funding very quickly so that we can get that out. But I object to just tacking that amendment on here in the Finance Committee without going through the due diligence of the committee. It's also worth noting that we don't have even budget targets yet. So this is very unusual for us to be spending funds without even having our final forecast or our budget targets. But because the Senate File 241 is merely taking the very same path and the very same proposal and the amount of money that the governor vetoed last year, I believe we can and should make an exception and get this money out the door right now before we even have our final forecast and our budget targets. So certainly support 241, but am concerned about the amendment and its timing.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, Council Bodern has an amendment to the amendment that I'd offer.
Mr. Bodden.
So, Madam Chair and members, I've talked some to Senator Westrom, and I think the quickest way to do this would be to add a sentence to the A13 amendment beginning on page 1, line 12, after the period. And I'll read it fairly slowly here, but the concept is straightforward. At least 50% of the money in this account must be used, 50% of the money in this account on the effective date of this act must be used to implement provisional ballots.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. On page 1, line 12 of the A13 amendment, after the period, insert at least 50% of the money in this account on the effective date of this act must be used to implement provisional ballots.
Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, as this amendment, if it were to pass, would move forward with allocating the rest of the money, this would leave money in place for some of the cyber security issues we've talked about, but also bring forth other security processes to our election that the Secretary has laid out this morning that are big concerns of his and our state, and with the goal of an integrity ballot that everybody casts that's accurate and not been manipulated with from the database all the way through to the election box. 47 other states have this, and it seems to me with this money being used to help secure our elections from the electronic to the paper side of things and the ballot box, this would be a very helpful amendment to Senator Cohen's amendment if we're going to allocate all the money through his amendment.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Madam Chair, I think one of your members had a hand raised.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Well, Madam Chair, I do support provisional ballots, especially the administrative provisional ballots, a proposal that did successfully pass the Senate a couple years ago. And those administrative provisional ballots I do support. But I cannot support this amendment to this language to the A13. I have pledged to keep this Senate File 241 focused on the state voter registration system software and to be focused on getting that passed into law. I think this language would be problematic, just as the underlying amendment is problematic. And so I will not support either of them.
Thank you. Senator Cohen. Okay. Senator Benson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer. I know how much you want provisional ballots, and this would be a way for something that you have worked on for a long time to move forward. And I think it takes a lot of respect for the process for Senator Kiffmeyer to not say, yep, let's do something that I really wanted. And so I want to thank you very much for staying true to your word. When you came into committee, you wanted to focus on the funds that had been agreed to last year, and you are keeping your word. And I will support your direction on both the provisional ballot amendment and the underlying amendment. And I would ask my colleagues on this committee to keep in mind similar thoughts. Senator Kiffmeyer has worked a long time to get provisional ballots, and to be able to take something to the floor that could accomplish that goal would mean a great deal to her. And she is not doing it because she is keeping her word as she came into this committee.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, maybe Secretary Simon, but Senator Kiffmeyer, first question. The cost of a provisional ballot, in your experience and knowledge, could we do it for half of the money, or would it take more than half the money? And same question for Secretary Simon.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Well, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom, assessing the cost of provisional ballots at this table at this time would be very difficult to do. You would be looking at probably $2.5 million. Questions are spent over what period of time, they're set up. But actually, provisional ballots use the same kind of envelopes as an absentee ballot. Just the writing and the printing on that is different as compared to a absentee ballot. So we already have a system for purchasing the absentee ballot materials. Doing provisional ballot is the design work, putting in place, setting it up. In my proposal on the administrative provisional ballots, it's just focused on voters who are challenged due to the court having removed their right to vote, or through a court action in a criminal situation where they've had their right to vote removed as well. So in those cases, that data is already on the voter registration list. And so making use of those specially designed absentee ballot envelopes, and then also, as was previously done, was to include them in the count administratively. No voter would have to return or do anything like that. They were administratively applied and can be administratively lifted through a similar process as we go through for absentee ballots. But I'll reiterate again here in regards to the cost that my pledge was to keep this money focused, and that's why I'm not supporting it, but I hope that answers your question.
Senator Westrom.
Secretary Simon, could we implement provisional ballots for half the, if with just half the HAVA money, would that be enough to implement it in your office?
Secretary Simon.
Irrespective of your current position.
Yes, just as a matter of cost, Madam Chair and Senator Westrom, I don't know if we could implement it for half of the 6.6. For 3.3, we'd have to do some more analysis. What I can tell you is that every dollar spent on provisional balloting would crowd out spending on what our federal intelligence authorities and sources have told us we need to spend it on. I trust them.
So,
Senator Westrom.
Madam Chair, Secretary Simon, is that a number you could get me to my office in the next few days or by early next week? What, in good faith, what it would cost, or how, and if you come back with a $10 million number, then give me some incremental processes of what $2 or $3 or $4 million could do, but what it would cost to implement provisional ballots, as Senator Kiffmeyer has laid out. It sounds like we probably have systems in place that wouldn't be that hard to adapt. Could you get me that information?
Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair and Senator Westrom, we'll do our best. I mean, this isn't technically a fiscal note request, but we can do our best to maybe sketch out ranges at this point in that time frame. We can certainly do that.
Okay.
Senator Westrom.
Happy for more discussion first, Madam Chair, if there's anybody else that does.
No, Senator Westrom, you have your oral, your motion on your oral amendment.
Well, Madam Chair, at this point, I'll withdraw the amendment and urge members to vote against the Cohen amendment, although I think this would be a strong enhancement to our security if we go forward with the rest of the HAVA money, but sounds like there's a few numbers we need to get, and if half isn't enough money to implement it, then we need to have more than half. And so at this point, I'd withdraw the oral amendment.
Thank you, Senator Westrom. Senator Westrom withdraws his oral amendment. Back to the A13 amendment. Final comments? Senator Cohen renews his motion on the A13. Oh, excuse me. Yes. The clerk will take the roll call.
Senator Rosen.
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen. No. Senator Cohen. Yes. Senator Benson. No. Senator Champion. Senator Eaton. Yes. Senator Hayden. Yes. Senator Kiffmeyer.
No.
Senator Limmer. No. Senator Marty. Yes. Senator Nelson. No. Senator Newman. Senator Westrom. No. Senator Champion. Senator Newman. Senator Champion. Senator Newman.
What's the total? There be 4 yeses and 7 noes. The motion does not prevail. Senator Kiffmeyer, these are your final comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you have heard enough from me in regards to this. Again, I ask for your support and focus on the language of this bill that I think will do a lot and move it forward and get it expeditiously out the door, House as Senate as well. So I ask for your vote of support. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer moves that Senate File 241 as amended be recommended to pass and sent to general orders. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Thank you very much, Secretary Simon, for coming. Appreciate your testimony, and thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Members, we have Senate File 1093 before us. It's actually Senator Newman's bill. He has an engagement with the governor, I believe. So Senator Senjum is pitch hitting for him today. Senator Senjum, the Quarters of Commerce bill.
Are you ready, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair and members, this is a what I might refer to as a technical fix bill. It's a bill that Senator Newman and Senator Hornstein are personally carrying through the process. It went through Transportation Committee last week without comment, without question, actually. So I think it's pretty automatic. But what it relates to is at the end of the session last year within our bonding bill, we had a Court of Commerce provision pertaining to highways 252 in Brooklyn Park, Highway 23 up in St. Cloud area, and Highway 14 down in southern Minnesota, to include those in the Court of Commerce provision of that bill. MnDOT actually created the language for us to do that. We found out after session that language was somewhat in conflict with what MMB thought the language should have been. And thus, this bill before us today simply corrects the language, and MMB and Department of Transportation are in accord at this point, is my understanding. There's no fiscal cost on this. To some extent, we wonder why we're here, but I think it's a safeguard provision going forward. So, Madam Chair and members, I would just stand for any questions. Again, it's a technical fix bill that we'd like to get to the floor and get this thing moving.
Thank you, Senator Sanjum. Senator Nelson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I so appreciate seeing this technical correction early on here. Every day that there's been this holdup of funds that were committed in 2017 is a day where we're seeing our roadways be less safe than they can be or should be. And so I believe that I appreciate Senator Newman, Representative Hornstein working with MMB and MnDOT to get this technical clarification done and out the door, so the funds that were approved by these bodies and signed by the governor can actually get to their intended destination to achieve the much needed results. We cannot afford to wait any longer, and so I appreciate the promptness with which this language clarification can be addressed.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Are there any questions to Senate File 1093, Senator Sanjum?
Madam Chair, our preference would
Senator
be that
Sanjum?
this go to general orders.
Yes, it will be going to general orders. Exactly. Yes. Senator Ingebrigtsen moves then, if there's no further questions, that Senate File 1093 be recommended to pass and sent to general orders. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very
all.
much, Senator Sanjum. Members, thank you very much for a very, very good discussion today. Just look to your emails for committee hearings next week. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.